Whether you like the formal form of diplomacy or not, right? It's one of the reasons why the world is still at peace.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another podcast conversation. Today, I am doing a solo podcast conversation, and that is because I want to really dig into a particular diplomat of the 19th century who goes by the name Clemens von Metternich. Clemens von Metternich was the former Federal Minister of Interior in Austria, and he was one of the diplomats that really, shaped Europe as at that point, and even in the 20th century. This podcast was originally recorded in 2022, but I'm republishing it here because I think it still has relevant weight, and also because the former podcast where it was hosted is not really being used right now. I hope you find it useful, and I hope you learn relevant lessons as regards, diplomacy, international policies, and just how human beings relate to each other at a national and continental stage. Being managed by Word Podcasting. Check the link in the description for podcast recommendations.
Whether you like the formal form of diplomacy or not, right? It's one of the reasons why the world is still at peace. Oh, people don't like the United Nations, but like without the United Nations, right? And the ultimate goal is to achieve world peace, which they have, right, since the Second World War. Global peace. We can go into another debate as to whether this, wars has been kind of externalized and spilled over into certain areas, right? I think that is a legitimate debate, but, quote unquote, they have achieved their purpose, right? And, at the core of this is this diplomatic culture and this diplomatic lifestyle. And today I just want to talk about one guy that was really, if you like, fundamental in the diplomatic era of the 19th century, right? In the Austrian Empire. His name is Clemens Metternich of Austria. So he was a prince, right? And basically to just give a more background check, right, on who this guy is, so that we understand the context, right? Like where he's coming from, what his affiliations were, all those fun stuff that sometimes, not even sometimes, most times, is necessary if you want to really understand someone. So, Clemens, right? I'm not even going to try to mention his full name because I'm just gonna kill it. But yeah, he was the Chancellor of the Austrian Empire, right, and he was in office from 1821 all the way to 1848. He was born into the house of Metternich, and this House of Metternich, was a German noble family that originated in Rhineland, right? And then he was also a son of a diplomat. He received good education at Strasbourg and Mainz, right? And he also kind of his rise, right, through the diplomatic world started as an ambassador, and he started, with the Kingdom of Saxony, being an ambassador there. Then in Prussia, the Kingdom of Prussia. And then, he was ambassador in Napoleonic France. And then as foreign minister, one of his assignments was to, engineer a detente. Basically, this is kind of like the relaxation of strange like relations, right? So when things are tense, to just kind of like cool it down and saying like, calm down, calm down. That kind of thing. That's what the detente means. So with France, right? They included this was through, that as he was foreign minister, he did this, he did this detente through a marriage, right, of Napoleon to the Austrian Archduchess, which is like Maria Louise. And after that, I'm not going to go like deep into what he's saying, but like that's basically it. He was a diplomat. He gained like ambassador. He had a lot of ambassador, okay, not lots, like 2 or 3 ambassador roles before he finally became Chancellor of the Austrian Empire. Now let's just get back into what I want to discuss, right? What he actually did, and why I'm actually like speaking about him today in this podcast. So basically, he was the chief architect of the Vienna Treaty of 1815. Some people might be asking, "Oh, more waiting be that like who that one help? Like what was my business, right?" But the Vienna Treaty is very important for various reasons. You know, a lot of like Europe as it is today, right? I know, but like Europe was not. Europe was, the trenches in the 19th century. Everybody was fighting everybody. Everyone was carrying stick and beating their neighbors to stupor, basically. Right? That was lifestyle in Europe. A king going against another king to expand kingdoms, etc, etc. But then, the Europe as we know today it started changing and gradually, after these guys realized, oh, what are we fighting for? Like, what are we really fighting for? And so this Congress of Vienna, of 1814 to 1815 was, an international diplomatic conference, right, to reconstitute the European political order after the downfall of the French Emperor Napoleon, like the first Napoleon, right? So after the French Revolution, the Napoleon that emerged, that guy. So it was a meeting of ambassadors of European states, right? And the person who chaired it was Metternich, and it was held in Vienna. From November to June. So November 1814 to June 1815. What was the objective? The objective of the Congress was to provide a long-term peace plan for Europe by settling critical issues arising from the French Revolutionary Wars and the Napoleonic Wars. The goal was not simply to restore old boundaries, but to resize the main powers so they could balance each other and remain at place. More fundamentally, the conservative leaders of the Congress sought to restrain or eliminate the republicanism and revolution which had upended the constitutional order of the old European regime and which continued to threaten it. In the settlements, France lost all its recent conquests, while Prussia, Austria, and Russia made major territorial gains. Prussia added smaller German states in the west, Swedish Pomerania, 60% of the Kingdom of Saxony, and the western part of the former Duchy of Warsaw. Austria gained Venice and much of northern Italy. Russia gained the central and eastern parts of the Duchy of Warsaw. It ratified the new Kingdom of the Netherlands, which had been created just months before the formerly Austrian territory that in 1830 became Belgium, right? I mean, guys, I'm just reading this from Wikipedia because I don't think it's necessary to like redo it again. Just leveraging them basically, right? So that was the the Congress of Vienna, right, which led to the treaty at the end of the day. You might actually was my business. Again, I said, this kind of set the path as to the Europe that we know today, right? I mean, think of the European Union. If there was a seed, if you like, right, that led to what we know as the European Union today, this was kind of it. In the sense that, it kind of made conscious that, oh my guys, you can't just be doing this, killing each other to get land and territory, right? There has to be like order in place in Europe, right, to ensure that our kingdoms, right, are not only legitimate because the revolution kind of wanted to distort that order, that European order, but also to ensure that it's not a continuous war. Because remember, like they just defeated France, right? So Austria, Prussia, they just defeated Napoleon, and so as history goes, the French will want to come back one day and then fight again, right? So there was a need to just, level things out and say, see, calm down. Let's just calm down, first of all. So Metternich, going back again to our original focus, kind of started this thing. Okay, not kind of, right? His idea for the treaty or his idea for the Congress was to create a conference system, which was designed basically to regulate European politics in the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars, right? And then Metternich conceived of his task at Vienna as far greater than rewarding frontiers and restoring nearly forgotten princes to their thrones. So whereas, people that went there, like ambassadors, etc., went there, because land had to be kind of protected. We had, to ensure the this post-war phase is peaceful, not also, peace was not really a thing, but like it's peaceful, right, or has or has a stable state, we have to create a plan, right? That was what a lot of the ambassadors thought. But Metternich was thinking, into the future, basically, into like, what can we do now? Now that we have this kind of moment of chaos, if you like, right? Or this vacuum, what can we do with it? So you wanted to fill the vacuum with something much more sustainable and much more path dependent. So to understand Metternich and to understand, how this guy came about with this kind of ideas, etc., and how he wanted this kind of thinking, right? You have to go back to the guy's roots. So Metternich was influenced by the Enlightenment period. And if you don't know the Enlightenment period, right, it's just that period whereby guys are like, see, basically the Enlightenment, people started discovering, that things could be discovered, if you like. And people started noticing that the importance, if you like, right, of not just scientific kind of like scientific processes and scientific way of thinking in the sense of facts. So in sense of like agreeing to things based on facts and agreeing to things based on reason, right? But more in the sense of ensuring, especially as it relates to society, politics, that things were more stable, right? And their things were more thought of, right? Not that one guy would just wake up, right, and say XYZ, and then XYZ is done. But then it's like, why you do XYZ? What is the point of doing it? Now, the Enlightenment period was in the 18th century, so 1715 all the way to 1789, right? It was this. So basically, there was these intellectuals and philosophers coming together, right? Dominate, they were mostly concentrated in Europe, and their thoughts and their thinking and their just the way of seeing life, right, in terms of liberty, progress, toleration, fraternity, constitutional government, right, and then the separation of church and the state, basically allowed for this period, right, to be really driven by these intellectuals, right, and these philosophers. So he has influence, or he was deeply influenced by these origins, the age of enlightenment or the age of reason, if you like, depending on however you want to call it. Metternich remarks that near the end of his life, that historians would judge him more fairly, than his contemporaries, right? And that was not false, right? So this guy, as relates to what he wanted to do in Europe, he wanted to, as I said, create this conference system of a continent that never used to be at peace with each other, right? And so you can say his plan was ambitious, to begin with, but that's, as to his assertion that history will judge him more fairly, right? We see why now, because he saw that the world will want to claim more for peace, more for stability, more for not fighting each other, right? And so he saw that even from that period, right? And that's remarkable in so many ways, basically. So let's just kind of go back again to his own personal life. So he was born in 1773 in the Rhineland city of Koblenz, right? And he was raised in the atmosphere of wealth, I've said, political and intellectual sophistication. His father, right, who was Franz George Metternich, right, was an influential Rhineland politician who frequently, right, who also represented the Habsburg monarchy at electoral conferences. His tutor, right, so that's Metternich's tutor, was Frederick Simon, who was a deist, and he was fond of quoting Condorcet and the Alberts, who returned to Paris to take up the revolutionary cause in 1794. Though, Metternich did not agree with Simon's endorsement of the more radical dimensions of the French Revolution, Metternich admitted that he was influenced by some of his teachers' view, that is like Frederick Simon, and stressed the importance of French rationalism and materialism on his early philosophical and theological education. So if you're wondering, by the way, where I'm reading from, right, I'm just reading like highlighted portions of Metternich's Theory of European Order, a political agenda for perpetual peace. So this was written by James R. Sofka. Sofka spells Sofka. It was published in 1998. So yeah, he got this, influence from this deist guy, right? And if you know what deism means, right, is the belief basically in a god, right? So, but in a god, so these people believe in God, but based on reason, not really based on, okay, I've read it somewhere or something, but they're like, it's reasonable to conceive, or it's reasonable to imagine that there's a God. That's how they approach their own beliefs, right? So Frederick Simon was that kind of person. Another important person, right, or like a linkage to Metternich's story, right, if you like, or his background is Kaunitz, right? So Kaunitz was also, if you like, an influential person, and Metternich married Kaunitz's daughter, but like Kaunitz was, so he's his father-in-law. Kaunitz was like Metternich, if you like, right, but obviously older in the sense that he was also diplomatic. He also wanted, like, he also had a system um of diplomacy, and he wanted a particular kind of society, right, in the diplomatic sense that was void of peace and whatever. Eventually we'll see how like their tactics and like the way of working was so different, like between Metternich and Kaunitz, right? But it's important here to state that Kaunitz was also important in his life. Also, Metternich like often drew comparisons between the principles of government and chemistry and pathology, and this is so crucial, right? Um, in 1819, he wrote that it has certainly never been questioned that society, at the advance of society, are subject to the fundamental laws just definitely just definitely as physical forces are subject to other laws, differing in many respects from that function in society and the sphere of morality, but less in conflict with them that is generally supposed. Let me say that again because I think this is so like powerful. He said that it has certainly never been questioned, right, that society and the advance of society are subject to fundamental laws, just definitely as physical forces are subject to other laws, differing in many respects from those that function in society and the sphere of morality, but less in conflict with them than is generally supposed. Let's stop and reflect. So basically, what Metternich, right, was saying, because he also grew up with a scientific background, right? He studied a science course, right, at his university when he was much younger. But what he was just trying to say was that, coming from the science point of view, and we understand, that scientific laws exist, the law of gravity is the law of gravity, and there are certain things that kind of lock the law of gravity to what it is, therefore a law. And he says, that is also the case when it comes to society, basically, right? And when it comes to like governance in society. And he said that these laws, right, it's just to find the laws basically that function for in society, right? But then, because of the extra salt of morality, or like the sphere of morality as he calls it, right? Um, basically there is more, if you like, conflicts, right? There's more disagreement within the laws. So, I mean, the laws as it is, right, do exist according to Metternich, right? But then because of the human factor, these laws tend to take a different turn or a different perspective or, or a different outcome as opposed to, the natural laws that, just function as they are. Easily put, right? Metternich is saying for society, for governance and society, they are natural laws. The problem is that they're human beings. Right? Basically, for what we just read. So his rationalism, matured through his legal training at the University of Mainz. I told you that he went and studied chemist. He went and studied. He studied a scientific degree, right, in university in like Strasbourg, and then he now went, because of this diplomatic path, he went to University of Mainz in, what we today know as Germany, and studied, he went to go and train himself in legal affairs, right, in 1790. And his mentor there was Nicholas Vogt, and, he was a respected scholar at the university in international politics. And there's an important work that Nicholas Vogt wrote, right, in 1785, which, and this work in which the thesis is basically on the creation of a continental that is European continental equilibrium, right, as well as the necessity for some legal and rational regulation of the European state system as the highest ethical goal of politics. So that was like that's Metternich's mentor at the University of Mainz, Nicholas Vogt. That was his own focus. That was like his focus, right, based on a work he did in 1785 called, in German, Das Systems. There's Gleichgewichts. If you're German, forgive me, right? But that was the work that he did, right? And that was his thesis that, there's a need to find an equilibrium for the continent. This equilibrium should be rational and should be backed by a legal foundation, right? Which is making, and, therefore making it, the highest ethical goal of politics for the European continent, right? And this Nicholas Vogt, the mentor, also believed that the greatest goal of a truly, and I'm quoting directly what he's saying, the greatest goal of a truly enlightened society is the education of all men as to the importance of the maintenance of the balance among both nations and individuals, right? And so, from this, we can see how it kind of like started entering into Metternich or like really just forming who he became, right? And this is a really important quote because I think even up to today, right, it's still relevant, right? That an enlightened society basically, right, is grounded on people that are educated. Obviously, it says men there, but like due to the system at that time and society, but just people, men, women, children, etc., that are educated, right, and then ensuring that you understand that there needs to be a balance, right, between the nations and the people, right. I mean, the people make up the nation, the individuals make up the nation at the end of the day, right. So if you're able to find a balance between it, right, for Nicholas Vogt, Metternich's mentor, that was kind of the greatest goal of an enlightened society, such that one is not more supreme to the other, right? But then both work in this equilibrium, as he stated. And as a result of this, the scientific and the legal background, and just the mentors that Metternich had, right, he started to see politics as something that was clinical and rational, right? So clinical in the sense that you have to be careful, right, as to what you're putting in, what you're putting out, what you're cutting, what you're not cutting, what you're joining, what you're not joining, right? But also at the same time, it has to be rational in the sense of, kind of like removing biases and removing, the emotional factor, if you like, of politics, right? Which is, in a way ironical because at the end of the day, just you being human is a political position. But anyways, we won't go into that. But anyways, it does make sense, right? At least to the extent to which Metternich had its outcome, that this clinical and rational fashion, right, was necessary, and he said it was necessary for building a European continent, right, that was not in agreement with themselves, basically. So as I told you, he married Kaunitz's daughter, whose name is Eleanor, in 1795, right? And as I said, Kaunitz is okay. I did not tell you this, but like Kaunitz was the father of the diplomatic revolution of 1756, which kind of like changed the whole perspective of how diplomacy works at that period of time in the 18th century, right? And Kaunitz was, the Kaunitz family was also influential, just like the Metternich family was influential in in the Kaunitz's family was influential in Vienna, sorry, whilst the Metternich's family, right, was also influential at the same period of time. So, these were two noble families coming together, right? Not strange for that time period, right? To kind of maintain the wealth and the balance, all those things for family issues. But anyways, both men were influential, and Metternich married his daughter, right? So this is a man about to change the history of Europe, and then deeply in touch with the father, or like of the diplomatic revolution of the 18th century, right? So you can't have a better mix, right? Say 1 + 1 that equals to 1,000, exponential influence, if you like. Anyways, right? So on this political equilibrium, um you also have to understand kind of how, especially as regards understanding the kind of system that Metternich wanted to build, we also have to see Kant's point of view. So like Kant, right, Immanuel Kant, he also wanted this kind of system, right, or this kind of framework whereby politics was clinical and rational, and the same way Metternich was, even though he has his own, there's some things that were quite different from Metternich and Kant, right?